Hi, my name's Alan and I'm going to talk to you today about preparing and steaming a steam locomotive. And then once we've got it in steam, we'll look at taking it for a drive to look at the basic controls. One of the things to consider when you do work on a steam engine is that they are very hot, they're very dirty, soot and smoke in your eyes, and oil. It's always best to wear overalls, or you can wear old clothes, but don't expect to come dressed up nicely and go home nice and clean. It doesn't work. What I'm wearing is a set of overalls, but it's more specifically aimed at an era back in the 30s and 40s when the steam engine locomotives and the drivers were of a specific class. A driver was always considered to have a very high level job and was well respected in society, and typically would wear their own three-piece suit, or in latter years the companies issued with boiler suits and jackets. My own covering today is respective to the Royal Train engine that I've got as a model, and I use this as my normal outfit. The waistcoat was typical of the locomotive driver. In those days, locomotives never had speedos. They had a very strict timetable, and so the driver would know where he's going because he knew the road, so he would check the time as he passed a checkpoint, and he would know exactly how fast he'd been going, and he would know exactly how long it would take him to get to the next stage. So the the pocket watch was crucial to that success, and they were always pretty good on timing because of that approach. When we're looking at the level of competence of the old steam drivers, it was quite normal for passengers to walk down the platform at the end and thank the driver. I've got a lovely photograph at home with my wife's grandfather, who is being greeted by a Hollywood actress and her husband when he took them into King's Cross, and she's gone to the driver to say thank you for the journey. And typically of the press releases at the time, they made him get out of his cab so he could shake hands properly rather than just lean down on him. But his father, my wife's great-grandfather, used to drive the Royal Train engine into King's Cross as well, from the north, and he often had said to his family that King came and said thank you to me on the way out. Now we are talking in the 30s, so that was predecessor to our current Queen. But, the King made the point of walking past and would say thank you, driver. But he also knew his name, because there was only 3 or 4 men that would be eligible for driving that train. So prestige role, prestige activity, because they have a lot of responsibility when they're driving a train. And that's what I want to try and show today, is the responsibility that you've got for not only getting an engine to work, but when you're running it, it must be full of water all the time, it must have a fire, it must have the coal available, because you can't afford to let the thing run out. If it runs out of water, then you're going to suffer a major boiler breakage, if not explosion, because the water inside stops the fire burning through the metal, and that's one of the most crucial things. So what we're going to do now is actually look at the key parts of the locomotive. What we're at now is the major features of the steam engine. This particular one is a narrow gauge steam engine, the sort of thing you'd see in the Welsh mountains, working in quarries. The narrow gauge refers to the size of the track. In the real world, it can be anything from 1'6" to 2'6" gauge. Standard gauge is 4 foot 8.5, so much smaller than the full size things. So this, whilst in a model form looks like quite a large engine, it's because of the scale. So narrow gauge, lots of things on it are big. So much bigger, much heavier, clumsier in some respects, but nevertheless good workhorses. So this particular engine, this is the boiler. So in this part, in fact the boiler comes back into the cab. So this round part in the middle is the boiler. That holds all the water that's being heated. Here we've got what is known as a dome, and on top of it are safety valves. Key thing when you're heating the water up is you're making steam. And if you just keep heating steam and you don't let it out, the pressure builds up and you get to a safety point where it will actually split the boiler open. So safety valves are set that when it's at a set pressure, they will release excess steam. Critical to any working steam engine. If you imagine a kettle at home, when you've got that boiling, the steam's just pouring out. If you were able to stop that steam coming out, you'd find that your kettle would split apart. Don't try that at home. So the dome is the highest point in the boiler, the safety valves are in it, but also this is where the controls take the steam from. We've got boiling water below it, but this part has only got steam in it because we only want to use steam. We don't want water into the controls of the locomotive. So while we're up on this point, this particular engine is a combination typical of a lot of models of narrow gauge engines. It has tanks on the side called side tanks, but also to make it more convenient for driving, instead of having just a small bunker on the back, the manufacturer has actually built a complete tender. So the driver can actually sit with his feet in the tender and on it, but there's a massive water tank in that as well. That does allow us to use this locomotive for a long time without having to worry about topping the tanks up. At the front, chimney, nice and tall to take the smoke over the top. Most of what you see coming out of a chimney in a cold weather is actually steam. It's the exhaust steam from the engine. But as the steam passes up the chimney, it's actually pulling the air through the fire, creating greater heat. So most of the time, this is just steam. If you've got smoke coming through, it's because you're putting fresh coal on the fire. If ever you look at film of full-size steam engines, or even you're lucky enough to see them in action, you'll see them hardly making any smoke, maybe just a wispy bit of white, which is the steam. When that suddenly turns black and bluey grey, the poor old fireman's shoveling for all he's worth and putting fresh coal on. And it's the fresh coal burning and not burning efficiently that creates the smoke. So in the front here, this is called the smoke box. And when we open it, we've actually got an area here. The tubes, which lay all the way through the boiler, carry the heat from the fire and the exhaust smoke, and then the exhaust steam from the engine working is passed up into the chimney, and that creates a vacuum and it pulls the air through. So there's a Venturi effect at this end here. So the steam exhausting pulls the heat through. So in many ways, very efficient activity. And because it is a flow of vacuum in there, it's important that this door shuts tight. So when that goes on and it locks into place, we then clamp it up tight. So there's absolutely no chance of any air being sucked in and spoiling the vacuum on the front. When we look at the side of the locomotive, at the front, we've got two quite large cylinders. The rounded part at the bottom is actually the cylinder. The piece on the top is where the valves are. And there is a single cylinder in here which moves backwards and forwards as the piston rod goes in and out. So steam is put into one side of the cylinder and that pushes the piston forward, and as it pushes it forward, the exhaust steam from here comes up through the valve, up the pipe, out the chimney. The fresh steam is coming from the regulator in the cab into the back and pushing the cylinder forward. The opposite is happening on the other side. So we've actually got 4 power strokes. It puts steam in and pushes it forward. This one on this side pushes forward. When this one gets to the end, it pushes it back. When this one gets to the end, it pushes it back. So you've got them working separately, but there's a power stroke at each end. So it's actually got 4 beats to 1 revolution of the wheels. So 2-cylinder engine, but 4 beats per revolution. This is quite a simple arrangement. It's only got 4 wheels, 2 on each side. The coupling rod is the bottom rod which joins the wheels together. It couples the wheels so they work together. The connecting rod is the one that goes from the piston rod to the back. So as this is pushing in and out, it's turning the crank on that wheel, and the coupling rod couples it to this wheel. So you've got 4 wheels driving on the track. The other rod on the end, and this is a fairly simple version of valve gear that moves the valve backwards and forwards in the top to allow the steam to flow in the different directions.